And we are now recording. This is Kubernetes SIG Network meeting from October 15th, 2020. Lucky's volunteered to lead us off with some issue triage. And you should have, yeah. Well
Is this our
done.
first time using the new label? Are we going to use triage unresolved or needs triage?
Question. Why don't we try the new label and see what it gives us?
Is it and needs triage? My French isn't that good. Or is it needs dash triage?
You need a dash. Yeah, there's always a dash now.
Yeah, in American English. Let me go find the label. Needs. This one. Oh, okay. I see my bad label here. Okay, we just go top down.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, let me pop the hood on a few here. Okay. Accept, add accept, // header to HTTP probes.
Is that a SIG network thing?
What was that, Antonio?
I mean, that's not.
I don't know what this means. I don't understand what this help.
If I interpret it, they're asking for the probes that Kubelet sends to include an extra header. Antonio, is that how you're reading it too?
No, I am not understanding at all.
Yeah, I think this is pure.
I'm not sure why they had an expectation that the probe would work similar to curl.
Ah, so the kubelet pros.
Like, do we define anywhere that it's supposed to work like curl?
Does anybody want to pick it up and answer it?
Why don't you assign it to me, Lockie? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Some frameworks do weird things with content encoding, and it seems pretty harmless to me to just always send except star.
Yeah, it seems pretty harmless to me too. I'll just have to, I would like to understand what semantically that means to them.
Okay, next, reserve range within server-side wherein automatically assigned IPs will not be chosen. Would be nice to be able to specify a range within the server-side where the cluster will not automatically allocate service cluster IPs, but will still allow services to be created within the cluster IP manually specified.
So this actually goes well with the whole trying to figure out the IPv6/64 thing, where we ideally wanted to have part of the 64 reserved for user IPs and part of it reserved for automatically assigned IPs. So maybe you can assign this to me and I'll think about it.
Another question would be only one range out of the service CIDR? Like if we're going to start reserving ranges, why not multiple ranges?
I think the idea is if you have a very small CIDR range, then you want to carve out part of that for manually assigned IPs.
I think for triage purposes, it's clearly a feature request, so we can probably remove the triage label and keep it marked as a feature.
Yeah.
Do you want me to do that? Is it remove label needs triage, or
that would be my guess?
It's /triage accepted.
Okay. Thank you. Like that?
It only took us 9 months to get this. Triage accepted. Space. Slash triage is sorry. Triage is the
Triage
command.
is the
accepted
thing.
is the
Yeah.
output.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Now, will the bot
taking
take
it.
that? Will the bot
Well,
take the edit? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a different event. Okay, I'll come back to it if it hasn't. Pods cannot reach endpoints with in the same node for UDP services if they are using host network. This is you, Antonio.
Yeah, this is so we had an issue with the when the endpoints are using host network. Well, there are some cases that it's a weird scenario, and we added some tests. And when adding these tests, I realized that when the endpoints are UDP, they are not working with proxy. So there are more details. I think that it's a contract issue, but I mean, it's a complex scenario.
Should we assign it to you?
Yeah.
Is this you asking for help, or is this filing a bug because you know it's a real bug?
It's both things. If anybody's able to unblock me, and the other thing is to log it and to have it filed so we can revisit later. I mean, I don't think that anybody is going to set up a service with UDP endpoints using network. But if it happens, I mean, we have.
You'll be surprised. I'll take a look at it, but like I've never heard this before, so I wonder if there's environmental context. I'll open it and take a look.
Yeah, I have a lot of details, and I spend a lot of time this week with it. So if you have questions, feel free to ask.
Got you.
We good with those? Okay, external traffic policy, local in IP tables, proxy implementation intermittently fails if source is in PodCider. However, not part of the cluster.
How is something in the PodCider and not part of the cluster? Let's look.
Yeah.
I'll assign myself and point out that this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what the PodCider means.
It's because he's using the Azure CNI, which uses IP from the VNet. Can you add me there as well, Becky? So, because I think this might be on our
I'll
side.
add it. I'll come back and add it.
Thank you.
I got it. I'm on that one now.
Thank you. Package kubelet container helpers.go. The function should record event or panic when the value of input object is nil. Okay, status is always stuck in creating kubelet.
That's not SIG
Why
network.
is this network?
Yeah, so this has been around.
Assign it to me. I'll take a look.
Thanks, Dan.
Kubeproxy bind address flag defined is not correct for IPVS or IP tables modes. This is Antonio again.
Yeah, this is because Dan Winship added the dual stack to the kubelet. I tried to do the same for kubeproxy, and I realized that the bind address flag is really a mess. You know, it's used for different things in different components, and I mean, I want all of you to revisit it and decide the best solution for it.
I kind of suspect that the exact logic of what it gets used for has totally been lost in the mists of time. And so we should just simplify it for dual stack and then see if anybody files any bugs saying, hey, my obscure feature doesn't work anymore.
I'm really wary of like throwing things out that are potentially breaking without understanding them.
So
but it would only be potentially breaking people who were using dual stack. They would try dual stack.
Oh,
and, hey, dual stack doesn't support this weird feature, and we'd be explain that feature to us so that we can add comments to the code so that we know what it's there for next time.
Got it. If it's gated by the dual stack flag, sure.
but it's not gated. So the main problem is that the bind address is only used for binding an address in the user space proxy. And for the other proxies, it's used to pass the node IP. And the node IP is only used for a rule in the load balancer. The problem is with dual stack, we are passing the all zeros address. So right now it doesn't have any logic. So we need to normalize it, but we need to do it in a way that we don't break anything. And I mean, this thing has a lot of historical context. So that's why I wanted you and then all these people to chime in. And
so I think it's safe to say triage accepted on this one. We don't need an assignee unless somebody really wants to jump on it right now.
Okay, is that the top of the triage time, Casey? Time check?
Yeah, I was going to say we're at the 15-minute mark now, so that's probably the last one. Thanks, Laki.
Thank you.
Let's see if I can find this. Suggested topic by Manu. Manu, are you here? Sorry guys, getting a lot of sirens today, so trying not to subject you to them. Looks like Manu's not here, so Gobind, I think you're next.
Hey everyone, can you guys hear me, see me? Yes, okay, yes. Cool. Yeah. Thanks for the time. This is my first time, I'm a listener, first time talker, I guess, caller, I should say. Just wanted to introduce myself first. My name is Gobind. I'm a product manager on GKE and Anthos Networking, Google. I wanted to, talk about network policy, look at some of the network security things within GKE and Kubernetes. So what I decided to do was, since I've been hearing a bunch of like FQDN enhancements, and there's also a project that is going on right now to improve network policy in open source, thanks to Jay and other folks online. I figured it was a good time to sort of address this need as well and highlight it to the group and get your feedback. Just sort of a disclaimer that this is just a sort of a proposal in the sense that I wanted to get the conversation started, get some requirements from the community, because I mean everybody's talked to people and they understand these needs better than I do, most certainly. I think this is more sort of an attempt to gather some of these requirements and really understand what it is that an FQDN network policy might look like, if that's the right thing for us to build. So that prelude, I guess I'll stick a link here in the chat, which has a short one and a half pager that talks about what the need is, the customer need is. And I just wanted to sort of open up the discussion around whether this is a good idea, what sorts of things that we should think about, and really start gathering requirements, core requirements on how this should be done.
Thanks, Govind. I'll say I did spot that the other day and took a quick look and then queued it up for the one as well, and circulated it to a couple of my colleagues. So I think
Awesome.
we're interested in that.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Casey. And of course, you know, we've been talking, sort of having this discussion about how does Calico and Cilium and other providers fit into all this. And you know, we've been trying to figure out, like, you know, what's the right way to implement this in, you know, open source. And I think there's many questions to be answered here, but at the very least, I do want to first start thinking about what the right proposal should be. Like, what are the requirements that we want to you know, capture here, so that, you know, it's tricky from what I've understood. I mean, I haven't really, like, you know, opened the DNS book in a long time, so, so I apologize if I don't fully know the entirety of the knowledge there. But I think the important thing here is that this is a customer need, and I wanted to know, first of all, if anybody disagrees that this is something that we should address. You know, if there's strong opposition to that.
I feel like the proposal that's there is just not clear enough about exactly what it is that it's proposing. Like, several different people started commenting on it with completely different assumptions about what you were suggesting.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's definitely a to-do on my plate, to work with, you know, everyone who's interested. And by the way, the number of comments has been, like, amazing. So it made me sort of think about many things that I was, you know, probably just getting to on my own pace. But yeah, it sort of accelerated that journey. But yeah, I think it's definitely on my to-do list to go through and, like, really address some of these, the how it'll work kind of thing. But there were some more fundamental questions around, what are the requirements, in the sense that how frequently should it be updated? How accurate does it need to be, in the sense that, you know, DNS is not globally, you know, consistent. I saw that in some comments. Also, there was a question around whether this should be part of our policy, or it should be a policy of its own, like a DNS policy, like it should. So I think those are some of these open questions that I personally don't have enough historical context on Kubernetes to be able to answer. So if I think a good starting point here might be that if this is not the right sort of forum to have a deep dive on, like, a technical, you know, issue like this, maybe people who are interested in having a follow-up conversation can tag themselves on the doc, and then I can organize some time for all of us to sync up and really go through some of these details. Would that seem reasonable?
All this talk about comments on the doc, I've now checked with a G Suite and a regular Gmail account, and I cannot open it. So if anyone else is having this problem, maybe just, like, double check. Because if there's lots of comments, that means other people are successfully opening it, but I am not. And I want to make sure we have a link in the notes that people can open.
Govind, who did you share the doc with?
I shared it with this alias.
With SIG Network, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And maybe that's all you want it shared to. That's fine.
So Govind, typically when I share, I would also share to Kubernetes Dev.
Oh, okay, I see.
And that way, people who aren't necessarily on our mailing list but are on KubeDev can also open it. Unfortunately, our domain does not allow us to share with just anybody. It has to be a specific alias.
Right. Yeah. So I thought this was the most sort of appropriate. So yeah. So should I just do kubernetes-dev@googlegroups.com?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me add that.
That's why Google people always spam Kubernetes Dev with their Google Docs.
Yeah. Because we have been unable to convince our domain admins that share with the whole web is a reasonable thing for Google's internal domain.
No, yeah, I can't do that either. I have to create a Google Doc with my personal email account if I want to share it with. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the other hack. It's just to have your own personal Gmail that you send from.
Okay. The folks who didn't have access, if you wouldn't mind just trying again and verifying that this time it worked for you. Bridget, I think it was maybe for you to try it out once, see if you have access. Yes.
Yep, I can open it now. Thank
Okay,
you.
perfect. Yeah, and this time I unchecked the notify everyone so that it wouldn't spam people. But yes, okay. So I think a couple things that I just wanted to mention. Like, it does seem like this is something of interest, given the amount of comments that I've seen on the doc, and given that there are other solutions to this outside of Kubernetes, OSS. So I do think this is a valid case, and I don't hear any opposition to that. So I'll take that as a yes. And I think we should just make progress on figuring out where this belongs. I'll continue to work with the network policy working group. So Jay et al, I guess. I'll continue to partner with them. And then I believe Dan's also on it. So we'll just sort of continue to make progress on this and maybe come back to SIG Network with a more concrete proposal of how we should do this. Would that be okay as a next step? Yes.
Sounds reasonable to me.
Okay.
I'll make sure to do a review of that myself, and anybody else who is interested to encourage to take a look.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Thanks for the time. I'll take this and we'll go work on the proposal with the interested folks then.
Thanks, Govind.
Thank you.
I think we had H-Bagdi Harry, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about, I think we talked about this problem a couple of SIG meetings ago, where normal services, can they have SRV records? So last time I checked in, Tim asked like, okay, maybe do a write-up and send that to a mailing list. I just got to that yesterday, but this is the doc that I've shared on the mailing list and even put on the agenda. The background is you have SRV records for both normal and headless services. Headless services give you pod IPs in the SRV record. The normal services, they are sort of a CNAME and a port. So you have an SRV record for a normal service, but it points to my service.mynamespace.service.domain. And then you also get a port as the answer of the SRV record. So here is the sort of the problem I have described, that there are cases where even a service of type cluster IP requires they would like to bypass kubeproxy and directly send the traffic to the pod. So the doc is here. Antonio and Odell has commented on it. Please take a look. I'm looking for some guidance around how to move this forward, as to is this a problem that other people also have, and is this something that we could solve in the main line or not?
Is it bypass to pod, as in I want to use this service FQDN and directly connect to the pod bypassing proxy? Or what, like, do you expect the clients to do the load balancing? So I do DNS query, I get a bunch of A records, and then the client will do the load balancing on behalf?
Correct. So the client will take care of balancing, yes. And the client wants the IP addresses of the pods instead of kubeproxy.
My question, yeah, thank you. My second question is, those clients are not clients that can do stuff like, because pods have DNS name, if I remember correctly. So it's about, so you just want to, okay, I got your point. All right.
Yes,
right. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to, the client should only use DNS to get to the network.
Without the API calls or anything.
Without interacting with APIs.
Okay.
I just want to, there's two parts of this. There's whether SRV records for VIPs make sense. And my understanding, I admit I'm not an SRV expert. My understanding is that SRV for VIPs do make sense because they allow you to do like protocol-based lookups. And so then the follow-up question is, do we want in general DNS for endpoints unpacked from a service VIP, right? And if we do, then does SRV apply to that? So I think we should tackle those as two separate problems.
I see. So, so what would be the alternate sort of solution there if you don't use SRV records? Suggesting a DNS record and which resolves to like A records for pod IPs?
Yeah, I mean that's been done in the past, providing like a different, instead of svc.cluster.local, providing like ept.cluster.local. I think OpenShift pioneered that. And the interesting part there is, because we've got a bunch of different proposals in flight, like endpoint subsetting, we will need to figure out how that intersects with this idea.
I see. Okay.
Not impossible, just needs thinking.
I see. Okay. Are those KEPs?
Yes, there's a KEP open. I don't remember the number, Rob. If you're here, maybe you know it. For endpoint subsetting for topology. Actually, there's two KEPs. One for subsetting, one for topology.
Yeah, they're both closely related. One is 2004 and one is 2030. I think subsetting is 2030.
Okay, I can take a look at that. And what would be the path forward to coming to an agreement or approaching a solution?
But I have a question. What is needed from Kubernetes here? Because this is, I don't fully understand this. This is not watching the endpoints and create DNS records. I mean, it's a core DNS or whatever DNS thing only, no?
I think the question here, Antonio, is whether we decide that this is something that all Kubernetes DNS implementations should do, or whether we say, well, core DNS can be an extension, but it's not standard.
Okay, that's the part I didn't get. Thank you.
How many?
Like we have a specification. Do we amend the specification for this?
How many addresses can DNS return for a given lookup?
Up to 4 kbytes, I believe.
Yes. There is a standard size response, so large, yes.
Does it just randomly pick some number of the endpoints? Or do we have subsets, or?
I think there's a bit that says this was truncated, if I remember. So you can return up to whatever fits in 4K, and you say, and there was more. If you want it, please come back with TCP.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. And the order, by the way, there is no spec on the order or the priority or whatever. Every DNS server does their own thing.
I mean, I know there are some use cases where there are perhaps 1,000 or more endpoints, which is the whole point of endpoint slice, right? Which is what you were saying, Tim. So how does that play?
Yeah, exactly. Well, how does it play with endpoint slice? But also, if we were to do the subsetting approach for topology, right, where a node in zone A would get endpoints that were sort of ideal for zone A, does DNS follow that, or does DNS return you all of the endpoints regardless of zone? And if it does follow that, like, how closely does it follow it? So I think it's an interesting intersection of features.
Interesting. Okay. So
in fact, Rob, did you? We talked about adding it as to the KEP as a graduation criteria, right?
Adding which part? Sorry.
The DNS intersection with subsetting.
I don't know that it actually is formally added, but I do remember talking about that. Yes.
I remember talking about it. I think, let me put it this way. Rob, can you please add in the KEP somewhere that in order to be implementable, we need to have a discussion around what DNS does.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, I guess so. Then I'll follow up with Rob and Tim like later on as to how to solve the problem.
Cool. Thanks, Harry. Dan Williams.
Yep, just wanted to do a quick check-in on dual stack status. I listed off all the things from last time, and then thanks everybody who was editing that as well, removed the things that are already done. Just wanted to bring up that these, as far as I'm aware, are the current work items, and it looks like most of them need some review. There's a couple of the KEPs that don't look like they've had comments in the last week or so. So anybody interested in dual stack, please again take a look at these, do review on the PRs, comment on the KEP, that kind of thing.
Yes, so I took a look through the big PR last Friday when I had a big block of time. And I'm happy to say that I successfully made it through all the API machinery stuff, and I thought it all looked pretty good. The rest of the PR is also very large, but it's a lot less contentious. I have most of tomorrow set aside to try to go through that again.
Thanks, Tim. Go ahead.
There was yesterday or 2 days ago, Anis and Carl were debugging with, and I were debugging something, and we realized that core DNS is only watching for endpoints. We reach out to Chris Hover, I think that's the name, from core DNS, and he's going to try to implement slices in core DNS to have dual stack. So Rob Scott is there. Do you mind if I ping you in Slack, because he's asking for some questions regarding the slice?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I will.
Thanks.
That's it.
All right. And then Bridget, looks like you added something and then crossed it out. Is that all covered?
I checked and Tim took care of it already. Thank you, Tim.
Tim works in mysterious ways.
I did? What did I do?
Oh, I just relabeled a bunch of stuff.
Oh, yes, I did it while I was staring at the query. So now triage unresolved is no longer an interesting query. It only needs triage.
Cool. Well, that was the last item on the agenda. Was there anything else we wanted to talk about as a group?
I have that question I just put in Zoom in general. I ran into this the other day for a release that we were validating, and I keep kind of scratching my head over it. Like, when we've got service proxy kind of intertwined in a bunch of tests, not explicitly, and I keep wanting to like do like an A/B thing, I feel like it would be nice if I could just filter all the Ginkgo tests by ones that use the service proxy and ones that don't. But there's no way to do that, and I'm not sure whether we should have a way to do that, but it seems like a natural thing that we would want, because there's all these new, load balancer situations coming up, right? As we all know. Some of us are CNI providers, and we've got ideas around that. And sometimes you just want to know whether kube proxy is broken, because that's happened to me before for other reasons. So does anybody else feel like that would be useful, or am I the only person who wants that feature?
You are not the only person. Jay, I said before that a medium-term goal that I would love to see us take would be to break kube proxy, treat it more like a separate component. Like, I know right now we release it and it's version locked with Kubernetes and everything else, but I see very little benefit of doing that. And actually, I would love to see like two sides of what you just discussed. One, that Kubernetes itself has abstract service proxy tests, and two, that kube proxy has its own battery of E2Es, which could exercise kube proxy without running the rest of a cluster.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was hoping for. So yeah, to work around this, I've curated the list of things that kubeproxy needs. I think I pasted them in a blog or something. I think it's about 1/3 of the tests. It's either 1/3 of the tests or 2/3. I keep forgetting which one, but it's one of those. But I don't know. So I have like a shell. I don't know. Okay, I just wanted to make sure someone else cared about doing that. I can think about other ways to do it, or if anybody else has ideas, I'm happy to help.
Yeah, but when you had the discussion, the thing that is not clear to me is services for you is a kubeproxy thing, or services is, I mean.
What do you mean? What's that?
If my understanding in one of the conversation past week with you is that you and Andy were saying that services is something related to kubeproxy, not to Kubernetes. So I think that
in general, it's a service proxy as an abstract component. The fact that it's working properly is the thing that matters, right?
If I may add,
and
go ahead.
Some 90% of the time it's kubeproxy, but the other 10% of the time.
So there is the data plane part, that's the kubeproxy stuff. Any traffic is kubeproxy. And then you have the control plane stuff, which around the endpoint selection, and like the standard stuff, endpoint slice, the correct IP family, like release and allocate. Is it really like what happens if I try to allocate outside of the range? All of those stuff, happy stuff, or the immutability and all that. That's the whole control plane. And then there is the extended service stuff, right? That goes into the topology, the endpoint subsetting, and all of that stuff also has part control plane and part data plane. All the control plane stuff is part of Kubernetes because guess what? It happens, it's either inside the API server or the controller manager. But all the data plane stuff is kubeproxy.
So, let me redo the question. So is an end-to-end test that creates a pod, creates a services with some backend pods, and post the service API to receive, the request from the backends.
Sure.
Is a kubeproxy test or is a Kubernetes E2E test?
I mean, I would say it is definitely an E2E test. It usually is a kubeproxy test.
That's
but not always, right?
That's the thing that they want to understand is the service functionality. For me, it's a Kubernetes thing. It's not a kubeproxy.
Yeah. So I'll take a contrarian answer to what Jay said. I think that is a Kubernetes test, and it is in band that Kubernetes should test services and all of the API that defines them with some service proxy implementation. What we also have, though, is a ton of tests that are part of the Kubernetes battery that are testing kubeproxy specific stuff, right? Like there's one test that'll SSH in and wipe the IP tables and expect that kubeproxy brings it back. Like that doesn't really belong in a Kubernetes test. That belongs in a kubeproxy test.
Well, yeah, the first step is to tag those, right, as kubeproxy tests so people can skip them if they want.
Yeah, yes.
But yeah, that whole service, I mean, it's a good point that, like, yeah, where does these service proxy tests fall? Because they're not required for a conformant cluster theoretically. So they're this weird, it's really weird.
That's the thing that I cannot understand. The services tests are conformant. So you need to be able to create a node port and to pull the endpoint and reach the pod through the service node port. That's conformance. But you don't have to use this kubeproxy. You can have your JProxy doing that. That's my understanding. So that's the thing that I don't know if we have everybody here has an agreement on that or not.
I don't think we can solve it. Go ahead.
I was just typing in the chat. Anything that's defined by the Kubernetes API should be covered by Kubernetes tests. Whether that's conformance or not is a different discussion, right? So Does a service work? Yes, that's a Kubernetes test. Does a node port work? Yeah, that's a Kubernetes test. Like I said, the examples of restarting kubeproxy and making sure that it worked, that the services still serve, that's a kubeproxy test, right? And so I guess it would be great if we went through and just tagged those tests separately so that people could exclude them. And maybe in the fullness of time, we could actually move them to a separate battery that like is only for running kubeproxy. You don't need a whole cluster to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the start of that whole conversation on how to get there. So we don't have to solve this all today, but I'll talk with Antonio and whoever else wants to about what we should do about it over time.
I have a question on a different topic. Can we merge this large BR next week? Is anybody bending?
Pal.
Yeah, anybody else bending? Go ahead.
I was say I talked to you about this separately, but I'm making more time to unblock some of these big caps and PRs that have been in front of me and stalled in part on my ability to make time for them. So for the next couple of weeks, I've just canceled almost all of my like regular meetings at work, and I'm just focusing on getting these caps and PRs reviewed and merged.
Great. Anybody else had the big thing in mind for this PR?
So, I reviewed it this past weekend, and I did have some comments that I felt needed to be addressed, but it feels like it's at the point where we could probably get away with just merging it and then fixing things up later.
So everything you've identified has been addressed, except probably a couple of things. One of them needs to happen at the end, like the renaming the field, the variable name and the types. That's just too suffering for me to do it now. So I'll do it at the end. Other than that, what I'm trying to say is next week, if anybody really wants to say anything about this PR, please do. So at least we can merge by the end of next week. Because there are many things depending on this, like the core DNS stuff, all the stuff that we need to start going good to.
I have one question related to this: is how much are we worried about upgrades and SKU versions and all these things? Because I planned to try something, but I mean,
so there we're very worried.
Very worried. I mean, okay.
I mean, we're very worried, which is why we're going to make sure that given the quantity of changes I just pasted into the chat, that this will be alpha, because look at that change.
Yeah, but let's try to come up with, I mean, at least one or two scenarios. Is from upgrading from 120 to 119 to 120 and doing the dual stack after upgrade, before upgrade. I mean, let's try to reduce the combinations. And I mean, I would spend this next week with this, and I mean.
So the answer to this is two parts. The first part is we're worried. All right. And what worries me is we don't have a test today that you can churn and do exactly what you're trying to do. And as you asked around and you told me that this part of the test suite is broken for now, at least. Now, the second part of this answer is the following. We have had Lars killing this thing, but again, I cannot have Lars as an entry in the test suite. But we've been focused so much, like this time we've learned the lesson about like, oh, this is a new kube proxy connected to an API server, old API server, or old controller manager, new API server, or a new API server, old client. So there's plenty of code and tests made for that, and even some integration tests around what happened if I change the like service, create service on old API server, turn on the flag, get the service, what happens, and we have these things. So I am worried, but not as worried as I used to be. That's probably the underlying answer.
Yeah, but just give me a scenario, because I'm going to automate this. But I cannot deal with all the 200 combinations of people making the cluster fail. So let's say we want to upgrade once you are in 120, you upgrade to dual stack. I mean, you are upgrading 119.
We don't support upgrading 119 dual stack to 120 dual stack. We in fact guarantee that it will break some of your services.
Okay, that's a good answer.
Not necessary,
okay.
but yeah. Yeah.
And then by component, do we want to follow a process and enforce it? I mean, first API, then controller manager, then kube-proxy. How do we want to do
that's
this?
what sane people do, but as we discovered that not everybody is sane.
People
the insane, yeah. The insane thing is people upgrading nodes first, or control plane without API first. That's it.
We think that we have thought through both cases where the user upgrades their cluster and turns on dual stack at the same time, and the case where the user upgrades their cluster without dual stack and then turns on dual stack. We think we've got them both, right, Cal?
Yeah. So.
But we thought that before too. So.
This time I think there are specific things out there. So I'll tell you what. Let's work together on this.
Okay.
Right? If you have some time for it, I'm more than happy to sit down and scope it with you.
Yeah. Perfect.
All right. Thank you. Casey is smiling at us. It's like, you took what you're waiting time. Sorry, man. It's like, this needs, like, I just need to, like.
I'm just enjoying the discussion.
Go. Yeah. All right.
I like any discussion that ends with a let's work together.
I mean, we can use Calico for the test and open the bugs to Casey.
All right, I think this part of the discussion is done. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys. I think that probably brings us to the end, unless there are any other last-minute urgent things. Cool. In that case, we get 9 minutes back. See everybody next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks all. Take a look at the bugs. There's still plenty to triage.